afternoon and good evening. Welcome to our OpenNTF webinar. My name's Howard Greenberg, and today we have Daniel Nashed as our presenter, hard to say. He's going to speak about Domino server backup. So on the call with me is the chairman of OpenNTF, Graham Akers, along with board members Jesse Gallagher and Roberto Bocadero. Roberto, I hope I didn't mess up your name too bad. So thank you to the other board members and to Graham for helping out. They will help out with the Q&A at the end. So before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors for OpenNTF. Basically, you know, between HCL and Prominic, we couldn't really run OpenNTF. It is a volunteer organization, and HCL's contributions helps fund these webinars as well as contests and running our organization. And Prominic graciously donates everything related to our website and all IT related things, as well as services to keep it all running. So thank you to both companies. Again, this is a volunteer organization, so we'd love to have your help. There's a lot of things you can help on. I know, Graham, did you want to add something on this?
No, just that we're always talking about how we can support the community and make various services available, and had a good conversation yesterday at our board meeting. So hope to be able to announce some fun stuff coming up here shortly.
All right, great. Upcoming events, this is, I guess, a maybe. I think we're going to know more in the next couple of weeks. Have you heard any new status, Graham, or anyone else?
No, we talked to Theo a little while ago, and his plan is probably within the next 2 weeks or so make an official call on things. But he said he's crossing everything that he can cross that we're going to be able to go ahead. Okay,
well, that'd be good news. And I've been to Bruges before, and it is a beautiful town, really cool. Not sure I'm going to make it this year, but wish I could. And if you can make it, definitely I highly recommend it. It's a great event. Theo always does a great job. Our next webinar, we're trying to figure out some final details. Hopefully you got a good one coming. Just watch our OpenNTF.org/webinars page, and we'll put the details in there, hopefully in the next week or so. Okay, so the first question everyone has is, how do I ask questions? The next question is this webinar being recorded? So how do you ask questions? There's a questions pane on your GoToWebinar interface, and use the questions panel there to ask your question. And at the end of the webinar, we will verbally ask Daniel your questions. And so that way with the question and the answers will be part of the video that gets recorded. So if you could put in your question, actually I have this from this from our previous thing we did. We're actually not going to have unmute your microphone. It's a question of copying and not reading, but we will go ahead and ask your question in the questions pane, and we'll answer it verbally. So Daniel, thank you for presenting. I know you've presented before, and you always got some cool stuff you're working on. So let me make you the presenter.
Thank you. I hope I hit the right screen.
Yes, we're seeing the slide, the Domino 1201 backup.
The real slide. Okay, good. So thank you for having me. Welcome everyone to my second session that I can do for the OpenNTF organization. And yeah, let me introduce me quickly. I'm around in the community for a very long time. I'm HCL Lifetime Ambassador, and I'm a business partner, and I'm working very close with this backup application. And I want to start to introduce it first. So you will see that it is really easy to use, but it also offers really complex options, or not very detailed options how to configure the backup, which can lead to a complex configuration. But we will start easy, and I will try to explain all the background information that you need to know to get up and running. So when we start looking into it, where do you come from? Where we come from, where does it start? So Domino has specific backup requirements. When you back up your Domino server online, and this is most of the time the case, you have to use a Domino backup aware software, else you get inconsistent databases. It might work, but it might also not work. Also, volume shadow copy alone, if you use Microsoft volume shadow copy to take a snapshot of your databases, will not be consistent because the databases can be still open and you would only have a crash consistent backup. So also customers are asking for archive style transaction logging, and we have new requirements like Kubernetes or Docker environments where backup is a new challenge because you might not want to install a backup agent, and you have different kind of backup providers that might not have a native backup solution integrated with Domino. So here's the idea that HCL had with Domino 12. The main goal for the backup application is to bridge the gap between Domino and backup solutions. So the idea was pretty much that Domino can be a kind of backup agent that is using the backup API, and it's leveraging backup software in the backend. So many people I spoke to and many questions that I got about it was, yeah, but what kind of, how do we integrate, and why does Domino not provide storage? It's just because Domino itself is not a backup application. I will show you something very soon, how to easily integrate with storage providers. And then Domino can be a full backup solution for you. But in many cases, we need an integration with a backup vendor where you store the backups, right? So especially when it comes to snapshot backup, you usually have a backup vendor involved. So that's part of what the design goal was, that we have snapshot backup support in general, and also have additional functionality that makes it easy for an administrator to backup and restore databases. So to bring a very easy to use and feature-rich backup and especially restore experience to Domino admins. And you will see that this is really beautiful and works well from a Domino admin point of view, because it really understands Domino, in contrast to some other backup applications that don't really understand what Domino is and how to use it. So, but let me also say, if there is a vendor supported solution from the backup vendor, that is always the best solution that you can have, because they integrate it with their backup API, with the Domino backup API, and that's the best solution that you can have. A Domino backup solution can't be on the same level for long-term backup, for example, as a backup solution from a backup vendor, right? We're not seeing that HCL is reinventing backup and building their own backup solution that is working on its own in all cases. But you will see the details and you will understand the background and how it's built and how it's designed to work. So the main functionality is really the backup functionality and restore functionality, but also we have integration points I will talk about later in this workshop. It is available only for Windows and Linux, because HCL thinks that AX and OS400 already have strong vendor support. So most customers on AX and OS400 use the IBM solutions that are out there. On OS400, there is a specific fully integrated solution with OS400 operating system, and on AX we have IBM Spectrum Protect, which is also available for other platforms, and that's the solution that we as partners would recommend to customers. On top of this functionality that you will see, we have something that is, I think that's unique in the industry for Domino Restore. You will see that you can restore documents and folders back into the original database. You restore a database temporarily, and usually the user has to go in, or the admin has to go in for the user to find out which documents have been deleted, which folders have been deleted, and it takes quite some time to find which documents can be recovered, and there's automation for that. In addition, it has Deos restore capability. So the backup functionality doesn't include Deos because Deos doesn't need a backup agent. It's just a large number of flat files that are always written once and read many times, and they're always consistent. They are either there or you don't need to back them up. So you can take a normal backup agent that is not Domino aware and back up Deos. But what is in the product here is a way to restore Deos objects, integrating the restore operation with your favorite backup solution. And I will explain that in detail a little bit later once you saw the integration points. I think the technical background is clear. You need a backup API. And in this case, Domino has its own server task called backup to back up the databases. And it's using the backup API. It brings databases into backup mode. And then the database can be backed up using whatever interface we choose to back up the databases. I will explain the Delta information a little bit later in detail. So let's have a quick look what components we have for the backup and the restore. Obviously, we need a backup server task, and we also need a restore server task that work hand in hand. The backup takes care of the backup and also to prune older backups, and the restore application is pretty much responsible for restoring the databases, restoring transaction logs, and also restoring other components like Deos objects if we have it configured. You can either run it every time you run a restore operation, or you can run it like as a permanent server task, like a daemon, waiting for your restore request. Most of the time, I use it in a way that I don't have it running all the time, and you have a button in the UI where you can run a remote server command, a console command to start the restore operation. Last but not least, we have a new database called Domino Backup NSF, and a template with the same name. It holds the database holds the configuration. It holds the database inventory, so which databases have been backed up. It also holds the backup logs, and it is your restore interface, and it contains the restore jobs that you create, and this is all working hand in hand, and you will see that in a demo shortly. So I don't think we need to look into all the details on the slides. We do that live, but you have the slides. Some of the slides will be just in the presentation, and we look into it live, and you can take the slides later on to look into it again. But let me now explain first one of the basic backup concepts. So we have multiple backup concepts when you back up a Domino server, and I'm starting with the full backup scenario, which will be also what I show you in the demo, in the first demo. So a typical setup which is a simple backup scenario, is that you have a full backup every night, and you have only transaction log in circular transaction log mode. So that means you don't need to back up the transaction logs. They are just circular, and they will be applied to the database once they have been written to the transaction log. You have limited restore point in time with the circular transaction log already. And this is the setup that I would recommend to a standard customer environment, to keep it simple and not as complicated as an archive transaction log backup, because that needs more planning and very specific configurations in some cases. So this would be what I would recommend as a starting point. Daily backup job, and usually you run that outside the business hours, and you back it up to whatever selection you make. So a first scenario to back up databases to, and that's the most simple scenario that you can think of, you back it up to disk space, right? To a large disk that you have in your environment. And because it is a full backup every night, obviously this isn't a good way to back up if you have no storage optimization. So as I mentioned earlier, Domino alone can't be a full backup solution. So we need at least some intelligent storage in the backend. When you look at backup solutions like Cohesity, they offer you a backup repository called a view, and this is similar to a mount point to your environment, and you copy all the files to the Cohesity mount, and Cohesity takes care of deduplicating it, of compressing it, and taking a secondary backup of your data. So that means you just copy it over, and in this case, the Domino backup application can just use a normal file copy operation, and without any special configuration on the Cohesity side, you have a fully integrated backup solution, because Domino takes care of the backup and Cohesity takes care of storing the data. This also works with other solutions. For example, if you have a TrueNAS appliance, or if you install a TrueNAS server, TrueNAS uses ZFS underneath. And ZFS is a very powerful file system that allows deduplication, compression, and I have it running in my environment on my production Linux servers, and it is very well compressing and deduplicating the data. So if you have backups multiple times in a week, you end up maybe with 1.5 times the data that you have, unless you do a full copy style compact every night, what you shouldn't do in normal cases. Usually you have once a week copy style compact of your databases. And in that case, a TrueNAS solution, Cohesity, or a NetApp or other deduplicating storage will be your friend and will really do a very, very good job in combination with Domino. So let's have a look how that works and how you can quickly start. When you install Domino 12, I would recommend installing 12.01 because it has more functionality for Domino backup, but also for other new features like the cert manager and other new functionality. When you have that installed, you could actually just have a 2-command solution to back up your Domino environment. So the first thing that you do is you load backup once, and the load backup will create a database, the Domino Backup NSF, and it will come with two default configurations, one for Windows and one for Linux, and we will have a look in a minute. The default configuration might not be what you want. It says C backup NSF and C backup transaction logs. In production environments, obviously you have separate disks, but if you have a small test server, you might only have a disk C, right? So this example is there that you can start without any configuration change on your first test server. And in case you run it on a production server, you just need to review the first section of the configuration, the main configuration, because everything else will be set up for you for a file backup integration. Let's have a look. So my first demo will be on Windows. I installed a Domino server for you. It has no backup configuration so far. And as I mentioned, I will just run the backup once. And it says, creating new database, new configuration database created. Please review your configuration before first backup. So we take the database. Here it is. And when you look into the configuration, so we have different sections. One section is the configuration. We have configuration, we have the backup logs that we will see in a minute. We have the restore jobs and the database inventory and the global configuration for global settings. So when you look into this configuration for Windows, here are the default settings that I mentioned. And because my Domino server is installed on D and I have free space on C, I will just stay with the default configuration. That means my next step is to do the same operation again, load backup. And you see, it finds out we're running translog in circular mode. And it takes one database at a time, backs it up, and copies the database to my C drive in this case. And I took half a gig of data, which is a very small test server. It has no real data on it. And we had a decent data rate on my test machine here with 107 megabytes per second. It would be faster when you have bigger databases, because in my case, I have many small databases and the overhead per database is reducing your backup performance. So if you have large databases, you can get much higher throughput. And the throughput is only depending on your environment and not on Domino in this case. So let's have a next look. So let's check what logs we have. Here are the logs that have been created. So it's a summary of what you have just seen on the console. And it has, depending on the configuration, also a log document with all the details in it for every database. It's actually the database inventory in a file. So I will show you the inventory in a minute. And it can be stored in the database and in the file system at the same time. So in case your backup database would be corrupted in some way, the log can be used to reconstruct the database inventory from the command line. That's why we have the detailed logs in here. So you see all the details. You would see excluded databases or databases that caused an error. And in case you're interested to get information about backups by email, you can configure in the notification tab what kind of information you want to see. Errors, warnings, and also when everything is okay. So if you want a nightly summary email, you just go enable OK, and then it will send an email, in this case to the admin group. And here you see something special. Usually you put in a name or a group or whatever. In this case, it is a formula. It's a formula because when the backup ran, this formula is executed on the result, on the backup result. So you can actually define your own criteria when a backup was successful and when not. And this shows a basic principle here. Keep it simple for everyone who just wants a backup, but make it very flexible for admins and consultants and partners to build their very flexible solution. Okay. What do we do when we need to restore? I just mentioned we have a database inventory. The inventory is here, and it shows all your databases and also delete databases because it keeps track of the database, and the database will be removed from the inventory as soon the last backup for this database has been pruned. So the backup application really takes track of the whole inventory and the logs. When I now want to restore a database, it's a quite simple operation. Let's take, for example, the directory assistance database. I made a change to the directory assistance database, and I wanted to get it restored to see the original values. I just go in here and look into that document. You see I have one backup. You see the backup time. And I can now take this either from here or from the view already and just run a restore. This opens a restore document. And in the restore document, you could select a backup. But if you have many backups, and you might not find the right backup. And the backup is always stored for consistency in GMT format, the date and time. But the restore time select over here, similar to other backup applications, allows you to specify the point in time from the user perspective or from the admin perspective, because the user calls you and says, oh, the database was fine at that time. So you go in here, select the time, and then you press this button here, and it will pick automatically the right full backup for you. In my case, I keep it simple. I just submit the job. Now the job is sitting here waiting for the restore. As I mentioned before, I'm normally not starting the restore task permanently on the server, but here is a button that does a remote console to start the restore operation. It is started, and it's already restored. It's a small database that's really quick. And you got the database restored, you have a link to the database, and depending on what you did, you could now open the database, send it to the user, send a link to the user. Obviously, when you didn't change the replica ID on restore, the restore database link doesn't make much sense, because if you have the database on your desktop already, it will then probably link to the existing database, right? This makes more sense when you restored with a different replica ID. In that case, you can also change the title of the database and let the user know this is your restore, and this can be all done automatically. So I can now open the database, but I think that is not what we want to see, right? We want to have a more sophisticated example here. But let me show you something other that is cool. When you back up, when you do a restore, usually you don't keep track of when was it restored, and then you have all the backups laying around on disk. Here you have a view by retention date, and the retention time can be specified in the global settings, and the restore automatically sets that time, and you can have a look what databases need to be deleted from the restore, but the backup doesn't delete them on its own. It makes it very easy to do that as an administrator. So you can select one or multiple restores and can just specify delete restore database, and then you run the backup command and it will delete the database. So it's deleted. Now it shows as deleted. And when you want to remove the deleted database entries here, you just press this button and it's gone. So we have the full cycle of backup, restore, and restore retention, which is kind of cool because many times admins forget about the restore, and then it's filling up your server, and it's maybe even backed up again. Okay, let's do a more advanced example. I have a database prepared for you, and we just took a backup, right? I have a document in the inbox. I have a couple of folders for workshops, for OpenNTF, and I would just newsletters, and I just will go in here and delete all my documents. All gone. I also have to delete them from trash because the restore knows about the trash as well, and it would say, oh, I'm not restoring it, it's still in trash, I'm not restoring it. So let me delete everything beside one document. And what about deleting folders? Should we delete some folders as well? Let's delete two folders. So now I have to find this database in my backup. Mail, take my database, restore it, and I restore it to the last backup, and then I specify restore documents and folders. And if I want to, I can also specify a separate folder, and it has some preferences here that you can configure in the global settings, that you have a special folder, because users come back to you in some cases and say, yeah, but I got all my documents back, but which documents did you really restore? So that's another option, to create another folder which contains a reference to all the documents that have been restored. So I do another submit restore, and you will see all the operations also on the console of the server. But oops, database already exists, so I already had a restore. Let's do that again. And now I do my restore. So it's green, the restore worked. And now you see that we got 2 folders restored. We had 19 documents restored. We had 1 soft delete that it was not restored. Soft delete is the trash folder. And we had 3 documents that had deletions that were were in the database already before the backup has been taken. So it's really looking for deletion stubs. And it restored 19 documents. And the folders it restored are those folders here, those 2 folders that we deleted. And it even gives you the time when the folder was deleted. So let's open our original database. Here are my folders. The documents are back. The unread marks are not preserved in this case. They can't be preserved because the documents need technically to be updated. They have the same unique ID, but they have an updated timestamp, else they wouldn't replicate anymore, right? This is really important. So in the first betas, the sequence time was the same, and then we figured out that this was a too good restore and it would never replicate again because it was an older document. So it is the same document, it has the same unique ID, but a new sequence time. And you see here another folder that's created by the server for you. That's why it's signed by the server. And in this folder, you see all the documents that have been restored, all 19 documents. Okay, so I would say this concludes the first demo, and we go back to slides. We saw the restore operations. We don't need to see that again. Let me explain quickly which type of files are involved and why. What we see in the backup are NSF files, NTF files, .box files, also the other NSF formats, NS7, NS9, NS11. Those databases will be also backed up. We have the transaction logs, which are only backed up when we are backing up transaction log, and I will explain this in a minute. And we also might have delta files. Delta files are files that contain information that is in flight during the backup. When the database is put into backup mode, some changes are recorded in the database to make it consistent after the backup has been processed. And when you restore the database, those delta information needs to be applied. For a file copy backup, for your convenience, out of the box, auto apply the delta changes is enabled because the Domino server can still access the database. So you will never see any delta files when you use the file integration, which is kind of cool because then the database is consistent. It's always consistent because all the changes were directly applied. So you could even copy it back without the backup restore operation. Another file that we have is the DAD file. When you restore a database, it is copied from another location, from a backup location to your Domino server. And if you put it on disk directly with the right name, the Domino server would see the database, access the database, and then you can't completely recover it anymore. And maybe you also still need to change the replica ID or disable replication, which is also part of this restore operation. And that's why the database has an appended DAD. That means the databases are copied over as a DAD file. Then all the operations are performed to recover the database. And the final step of the operation is to rename it back to the original database name that you requested for the restore. That's why we have DAD files. This is quite similar to most other backup applications. Some of them even call them with the same name. So when you look into the restore, you saw the restore already live. What happens is the restore task goes to the storage, restores the database into the file space, and then it also copies back delta files if present. For the file copy operation, we don't have that. But for other backup operations, other integrations, delta files might come into play. And so those delta files will be automatically applied. There's nothing that you need to take care of manually. But it's still good to understand the concept and the background for it. We already had the restore with folders and documents. And what happens here is it is doing a normal restore. And after the restore has been created, the database here is synchronized with the mail file. So what happens, the restore application goes into the mail database and checks for deletion stubs for documents and for folders. And if we find the unique ID in here, it will make sure that the folder, including the documents, will be restored depending on the restore option that you selected. The database remains on disk because it could be that a user wants more documents or doesn't trust you that it really recovered all documents. So you use the backup delete operation after the user is happy with the restore. Okay, the next mode would be a full backup with transaction log backup. That includes archive style transaction log, which is a more complex setup because you always have to take care that the transaction logs are backed up separately to the full backup. So during the day, you schedule once, twice, or every 2 hours, whatever, depending on the size of your server and the volume. The transaction logs are also backed up, and you also need a location for the transaction logs. The easiest integration would be also a file backup space, and Domino the backup task will take care of backing up transaction logs. And in a restore operation, when you select point in time, it will also restore all the transaction logs step by step for you. It's all fully integrated. I think we can skip that now. Maybe I explain it a little bit. So incremental backup works in a way that when you have new databases or databases got a copy style compact or fix up -j, then the database gets a new database instance ID, and the database instance ID is used for the backup. So all the changes to a database are recorded by DB instance ID. And when you restore a database, you can't restore over the point where the DB ID changes. So every time that happens, that the DB ID changes, you have to take a full backup of the database. So the backup solution has a full backup and an incremental backup option, and you would run once or twice a day or even more times an incremental backup if this is needed, and the backup application will take care of taking the right databases for you. But you should really avoid compacting databases during the week. I would always compact them before the full backup. Restore point in time. I'm not going to demo it, but it works exactly in the same way. You just specify in addition a recovery time, not just the selected backup time. And this restore time select comes into play here as well. Here's another button, and you can take that time from here to here and recover point in time up to that minute or second. Right? You enable recover point in time. If you don't specify any date, it will recover up to the current minute, and else it would recover to the recover point in time that you specified. Here are the settings. So when you do a full backup, you just load backup or backup -b for a normal backup. When you're in archive transaction log mode, you run backup -t to transaction log backup and backup -i for incremental backup, which does what I just explained. Backup integrations would be the next part. So I spoke about backing up to a file space. Obviously, this will not fit for everyone. So the backup integration has a very flexible interface which allows you to do any kind of integration. So it has, besides the file backup commands that can have formulas as well, and I will show that in a minute, the command line interface can be used. Like you can run any kind of OS level command in a very flexible way. It can be a shell script on Linux or a batch or a PowerShell script on Windows, and it's all customizable by formulas. And last but not least, if you have an application that needs a REST interface, you can run an agent that uses, for example, the Lotus script web request API that was introduced in Domino 10, and you can use REST commands to communicate with your backup application. This all depends on your solution. I will show you one integration that many people asked for. I'm personally not a big fan of the S3 integration, but it is a valid approach. The problem here with S3 is that it's not that fast in most of the cases, and it will need the full backup space every night. And you're usually, if this is hosted, you're paying for the backup space and not for the deduplicated space. Even the vendor, if you put this into a cloud, for example, would deduplicate in the backend, right? You're always, or not always, but in most cases, are paying for the volume and not for the deduplicated volume. The flow is pretty simple. The Domino backup task puts the database into backup mode. The OS level command is executed. In this case, the S3 integration, which is a scripted integration. Then the database is taken back into normal operations mode. The backup task checks if changes occurred during the backup. A Delta file is created, which is then also backed up in the exact same way as the database along with it. So the challenges here is we have the Delta backup files, and the restore operation needs also the same type of integration. You will find those kind of integrations on a Git repository hosted by HCL. Sorry. We have a GitHub project here, and that GitHub project is split it in two parts. One are the backups solution integration points and integrations, and it has also a nice UI similar to what we saw with Keep. They have a very similar look and feel, where you can go into detail about the backup solutions, and you have additional information about what is a snapshot backup, what are Delta files, and then last but not least, the providers. Okay, so the command line interface, I'm not going into all the details, but I put some references in here. We are looking live into the S3 integration because it's much nicer to show that to you on a server that has it configured. It's not yet posted. I have it almost ready to go. But there are some documentation steps that need to be validated, but you can expect it to be there next week. Here's another server. It's one of my lab servers. And the configuration looks different here. We have the S3 Minio integration. It also works for AWS, but I'm using a Minio server in this case. The Minio server needs a configuration for the backend, and then you specify, instead of a file backup location, you're specifying S3 bucket here. And I have the same bucket for NSF and for translog. And this configuration is then leveraged by scripts that are here in the backend. So here is a script that is calling MC, which is the Minio client. And you can do the same with any kind of backup operation. And because it's quite complex, here is there's help for you to insert fields, like all the variables that you can use. They are documented in the GitHub repository if you intend to write your own integration. They're here for you to fill them in automatically. When you select them, they will be put into the document. And also you have a test formula button where you see an example what the result would be. And you could even go in here, copy it, and it's a very similar design as what Domino 12 has for Cert Manager. Okay, I'm not storing the document here. Let me give you one more detail here. To actually check what happened in the backend, to see if the operation was completed correctly, there are strings that can be checked in the output that is coming back. So when you invoke a command, the result is sent back to the server task, and the server task can then look into the result set. So the text that is coming back, if it doesn't contain OK, the OK string, in this case transferred, it is a failure of the backup operation. If it contains an error string like this, it will be an error. So both are optional, but they can be combined, right? You could use either or you could use both. In my case, I use both because I want to know about errors, and I also want to make sure even if no error occurred, it could be that the error text doesn't occur, but the operation might be still failing, even it doesn't show an error. That's why I have both in here. That's just to show you the principle behind it. So in my case, I would just go to my server and run a backup. And it will look exactly the same. It's backing up 56 databases and templates. And when you look into the Minio console, you will see the bucket here. And in the bucket, you can look into the bucket and you can browse the bucket, and you see that the add formulas that I'm using in the backend to store the databases, here's my full backup. It causes a directory structure that is fully configurable in that configuration. And backup and restore use the same mechanism for identifying the backup location. And the interesting part here is when you prune the backup, those operations are also in line with the prune operation. So when you look into the prune commands, they look very similar, and they do a MC RM, and then it will remove the data from the backup. So it has also prune directly integrated. So when the backup is done, it takes a moment, it takes longer, as I said. It is not as fast, even if it's local, and you will see a full backup log in here. In this case, and I'm showing you this example here, I can show you for a single database that I backed up earlier. It was a selected backup just for the log database. I set it to not only log errors, but also log the complete log. It says backup error for Pluto, but in this case, it's not an error log, it is a detailed trace log, but the name is still error. And when you open it, you see the actual commands that have been executed with all the results, with everything. That means in error case, you don't have to look into any log files on disk. It's all in your notes database. And this is an enhancement that came in with 12.01 with the additional integrations that have been built for the Veeam integration and others to make it really an end-to-end logging in this case. So here's the new backup that we have. It's a full backup, and we could also restore it. And here you see all the individual operations. And on restore, maybe I show that because that gives you a good idea of how it really works. We could go in here and do a restore. It works exactly the same way. Restore. We could even do multiple databases. I could take multiple data as a multi-database restore. I go in here, specify the right backup time, and then that's special. It finds it's a little bit different than the single database backup. And this is an improvement in 12.01 as well. It now finds out in which backup the latest database is, because you could have incremental backups, and if you select multiple databases, they could come from eventually from multiple backups. And when you submit the restore, it actually went in and put in the right selected backup in here. Okay, let's just quickly restore it, submit restore. You will see, hopefully, did it start? Yeah, here it's running. You see it takes one database after another. And once all databases have been restored, the whole operation is green. And the log is not listed here because everything went fine. So you would see all the different restore operation steps in the log file. And that would help you to find out, in case of error, what went wrong in detail. So it has end-to-end logging, which is a 12.01 feature, which is kind of cool. Okay. I think this was more useful than doing it by slides because that helps you better to see what's going on. Let's go back to the slides. Command line integration, we had that demo. So in 12.01, there are some improvements. One improvement, and this is really something that I personally like, because bringing something new into Domino and building integration for backup vendors that have no Domino support is kind of unfair, because all the other backup vendors did a very great job integrating their products and keeping their backup supported with Domino. So here's the idea. Why can't we combine a good backup solution that is fully integrated into Domino, leveraging the Domino APIs, and just use our front end for restore operations? So this is called third-party restore integration. And it works very similar to what you just have seen, but it just needs a restore command, restore DB command, not a back command and nothing. And you can use all the kind of operations that you want to have. In some cases, it can be challenging to get the right date format, but there is even integration for that. So the configuration in the advanced section has a way to specify the date in any kind of format that you want. For convenience, I put in a formula here that you can take and modify, and probably it makes sense to put this also into the GitHub repository. And it helps you to find the right restore time, because all kind of backup applications have different ways to specify the point in time for the restore. And the admin passes it in in nodes datetime format, and the nodes datetime format needs to be converted. That's one specific part. And the other part, and I'm not going to demo it, but I give you like the details on how this really works. So you put the database into third-party operation mode in the global configuration, and afterwards the UI changes. Obviously, you don't have an inventory in the database because we don't own the database inventory and backup, right, on the Domino side. But you have very similar operations, and you just need to type in the right database name. And I thought it would be kind of helpful if you could go like into your Domino directory or into the catalog database, select the database there. And I came up with a smart icon that you just can create, or even take this as an example and add something to it. So what this does is that smart icon takes the database that you have in focus as a mail-in document, as a person document, or a catalog document, and then it will create the document, the restore document for you in the right database. We spoke about the end-to-end logging. The interesting part is, by default, you can't disable the end-to-end logging. You can only switch from errors only to all output. So HCL wants you to have the log directly in the database and not in the file system, which is a very good way to go from my perspective. So you can't completely disable it, but it doesn't make sense to disable it because you want the logs in there in error cases. That's the default, error only. And if you want to see all the details, you put it to all output. Another kind of cool thing that came up even from, I think this was even a tester in HCL who suggested that change. You only had backup prune operations that went by time, like number of days until the backup is pruned. But it would be good, especially for testing, but also when you took too many backups or you got something wrong in the configuration and want to remove a backup earlier, you can now go into the backup log, specify multiple databases, and mark them for prune, and then you run the prune server command, and it will prune the databases for you. So it will prune all the logs, it will prune this document, it will prune the inventory. So it does exactly what a normal prune would do, but it will do that on demand in the way that you specify it. So there wasn't an aha idea, but obviously developer liked the idea and put it in. Multi-restore improvements, I talked about this already when I showed it. And I think I go quickly into the Veeam operations. I will not go into all details about the Veeam integration, but I will take this as an example for a snapshot integration. Snapshot integrations are kind of like the biggest challenge that you have in your environment to consolidate the operations in a way and to bring all the Domino databases into backup mode at once, get the snapshot consistent, and then let the backup operation complete, and then finally get all the databases back from backup operations at once and collect snapshot data, delta data into delta files and store them separately. And on a restore operation, you have to find the right snapshot, mount the snapshot, get the database back from the snapshot, apply delta files, and that's kind of complex. But the good news is it can be done, and HCL has done it for the Veeam integration, working directly with Veeam, finding the best way to get both platforms integrated. And I'm taking this as an example here. So you have full backups as a snapshot, and you have to mount those snapshots to get the data back. There are multiple ways of snapshot, and you can expect to see more integrations posted on the Git repository. One integration would be a volume shadow snapshot, which is a bit of a complex operation because on the Domino side, you have to bring all the database into backup mode. Then you have to invoke a snapshot backup. You can do that either with a backup application that is volume copy snap shadow aware, or you can use a helper tool from Microsoft that brings your volume into snapshot mode. And then you can use any kind of backup application to back up the databases. But this is kind of complicated and this needs really close integration. That's why you didn't see an example yet. And maybe there will be a more efficient way to do the integration in future. So the first integration was focusing on the Veeam integration as a snapshot integration. But there might be other integrations that would be worthwhile looking into. And one of my favorites would be a Linux integration. On Linux, the file system doesn't have volume shadow copy, obviously, because it's not NTFS. But on Linux, we have other file systems, OpenZFS, and also the ButterFS that Susie is favoring. And those are both file systems that can be either used as deduplicating backup storage or as a snapshot file system. So the file system has snapshot embedded. And one of my ideas that I will contribute to the Git repository is that we do integration with a ZFS file system. So Domino would bring the databases into backup mode, then initiate a ZFS snapshot. The ZFS snapshot is very, very efficient, and you could even store those ZFS snapshots in remote locations. So it has kind of replication for ZFS snapshots to put it into a disaster recovery location, and you can use ZFS operations to synchronize it back when you need it. It's very interesting, but we don't have a full integration here yet, but it's on my list of things to do. But the first one that we really wanted to do, because many customers have asked for it in the AHA portal, and it was kind of a big challenge to get this in, but as you can see, they are one of the leading vendors on the market, and that's why it made a lot of sense to look into this first. So right now, before this integration, a Veeam admin really had to go in and configure like some scripts that try to bring databases into consistent mode, which wasn't really what we want from the Domino side. And there was zero restore integration for Veeam. So the design goal was really to take best of both worlds, do what the Veeam admin expects and do what the Domino admin expects. And I just have shown you what I would see what the Domino admin would expect. You have a nodes database interface where all the operations occur. And on the other side, the Veeam admin doesn't want to install fancy software on their Veeam server. So it needs some combination of both tools in a way that both can operate. And I will just give you the highlights of it. I will not go into all the details of the slides, but I put all the slides in this presentation for you to read it afterwards. And the good news here is Veeam has a free entry point solution for up to 10 backup loads. It's a community edition. And even if you're not a Veeam customer yet, it might make sense to look into Veeam for smaller and also for larger servers, because it's a very, very efficient, good solution. And I really like that they have this community edition that you can use as a starting point to play with and even use in smaller environments for production use. Okay, so let's have a very fast run through this. Here is your Veeam server. It is a Windows machine always. They don't have a Linux server offering, but they back up any operating system. We have a backup job on the Veeam side. We have a repository on the Veeam side that has Windows admin accounts, Linux SSH accounts, and also Linux SSH keys for authentication, because it needs to communicate with your Domino server, or usually with the application in general, to freeze and unfreeze the application. And in this case, we have some snapshot scripts that communicate with Domino. So Veeam invokes the scripts, and Domino will put itself into backup mode, will bring all databases into backup mode, writes into the Domino backup NSF, all the metadata and everything, and tells Veeam, we are in backup mode, you can run your snapshot. Then Veeam goes to the ESX host or Hyper-V host, takes a snapshot of the VM, stores it into the Veeam data store, and then the backup operation is almost done, because then we have to back up Delta files in some rare cases. That's the backup operation. The restore operation, it's really straightforward, and it's what Veeam expects, right? And we're just having some scripts here that bring Domino into backup mode. But on the restore side, it looks a little bit more complicated, but it's well designed, it works, and it's using standard components. So let me run through the restore in a very quick way. So the Domino admin uses the Domino backup and restore interface and creates a restore job. The restore job is performed by the server task, which is running a script. That script is invoking SSH over OpenSSH on the Veeam server to run a PowerShell script, which is their favorite interface to automate restores, which is then talking to the Veeam server, which is getting us a mount to our Domino server with the right backup. So the snapshot is mounted to the server. And then once that operation completed, the restore task finds the right database and restores it into the Domino server. Sounds a bit complicated, but it's well documented on the Git repository, and it's using standard technology for integration. It is designed with security in mind. So in all of the places, SSH keys are used, and all the operations are done in the way that Veeam wants it. And it also works for multiple databases at a time. So it has restore mount optimization, which is used to not remount the snapshot every time that you do a restore. I don't think that we have time to run through all the details. I put all the screen prints in here about the solution with details about the configuration and also some backend information, but you have more details in the slide deck here and also in the Git repository, right? It has a configuration which is in JSON format. It's all described, and I have seen the first partner who implemented it in production this week for a customer. That was the first feedback that I saw, but a couple of people already tested it before. It's available for Windows and for Linux. And it works both in a similar way. And it's agentless. That means no Veeam software is installed on the client. So obviously there will be questions, and we are heading to questions for this and other operations in a minute. If we have less questions, I will show you a demo about this live if you want to. But we will go for questions first. So here would have been the demo. Here is the link for an environment, a community integration that you could do, the community edition. It only works on VMware vSphere, like the commercial versions, but because it requires the Veeam storage APIs. So the ESX server doesn't have that. Only the commercial versions have the full integration. But if you want to run a lab environment, I have a very efficient lab environment. If someone is interested in that, I can share the details. So I've done it already with the beta version where I put multiple servers, like I have an ESX server that is hosting a Windows server that runs Veeam. And inside the Windows server, I'm using embedded virtualization with Hyper-V, and I run a Linux server and a Windows server. It's all on one box. And you can use the whole integration there. Okay, I have some additional information, but I think we skip that and go to questions. I hope we have many questions. If not, we are filling it with the demo that I just skipped and with some more detailed information.
We are not going to get through all the questions.
Yeah, we won't have the demo. Don't worry, Daniel. We'll have to
There's been lots of good questions.
Okay, so.
Okay, so let me.
Can I keep the? Back. Are you switching back? Because I could show.
Yeah, no.
Answer questions live. Whatever you prefer.
If we need to. For now, let me just remind everyone to use the questions pane for asking your question, and we're going to answer the questions right now verbally. So, Daniel, there are a couple questions just about Deos and backing up things in Deos and restoring them. Can you go over that again?
Yes. So we have no backup integration for Deos in this product because it is focusing on what a Domino agent would do. So if you look into a backup solution, they are mostly having a backup agent for the Domino files, for NSF, for transaction logs. But they use file backup operations for Deos. So what you should schedule is an incremental backup for your Deos repository. But on the restore side, we could integrate this backup solution for restoring, including Deos. And we have two different modes to do that. One is when you restore a database, you can specify that it should check for missing NLOs, and then it would invoke the command that you configured for your backup application to restore the Deos objects. That's one option. The second option, which is new in 12.01, is a separate restore that you invoke from command line, either for a single database, for a whole directory, or for your whole server. So it would go in and check for missing NLOs built into the server task for all the database that you specify, and then it's leveraging your backup application to restore the files. And it has two options. One is it gets by default a single file with all the NLOs. If the backup application has a restore mode where it can take a file, or it could run file by file restore mode where you specify that every NLO will cause a restore operation, which is not as efficient than doing it in a batch, right? It supports both operation modes.
Okay, Graham?
Yeah, there was a question here about the default files that get backed up, but you answered that during the presentation, so I'll go to the next one. And I think this should be a quick one, and I think the answer is no. Can the restore function fix a folder where someone has removed all of the documents from the folder but didn't actually delete the documents from the database?
The folder will be restored.
Right,
So
but I guess
if you have
the documents get put back in there that were taken from the folder, but they weren't deleted, I think is what he's saying.
Correct.
Yeah, but that should still work. It's using the same code that the replicator uses, and that should get the documents back as well.
But
Okay,
the documents weren't deleted.
So I would test that again, just to make sure, right? And we put this into the question, the FAQ that we post afterwards. But it should work. It should work in the same way.
That sounds good.
It does whatever it can do using Node's code, right? So there are some limits, similar limits that the replicator has. So the documents are copied back document by document in a way that it finds the document, it replaces it in the same way the replicator would store it in the database, but then it updates the document to make it newer, else it would never replicate to other databases again. And for folders, it is using, it's actually doing something that I put in as a trick in my blog earlier. I got that from a friend who had it in a presentation. Friedhelm Klein had it in his presentation, and I found this a genius move. So what you do, and this is completely independent from the solution, what you can do is you can update the design of the folder that it's newer than the deletion stub in the database, and then the next replication will take care of recreating the folder as it was before.
Wow, that is cool.
So you run design refresh twice. I have the exact instructions on my blog, and Domino Restore uses a similar way to do it.
Okay.
What about, there are a couple of questions, Daniel, on design elements. If, let's say, someone accidentally deletes the design element, or just the design of the database wants to go back to an older version, do you do anything particular with design stuff?
No, there's no design integration, but you can restore the database and get the design elements over. And I don't think anything will be implemented because it's really specific, and it can be really hard to support it because there are so many edge cases. So the focus was on what end users need, right? End users need documents and folders. This is the main use case. In case you need a restore of application where you need to change the design back and you had deletions or modifications, the best way is really to restore the database. You can either disable replication, which is on by default, right? When you it's a default option, you have to click it on to have the replication enabled. Or you can change the replica ID with one click during the restore. And then you go into the database and get the design back. So my servers now run backup. I have clustered servers. One takes the backup at lunchtime and one in the morning and in the evening. So I have it running on both sides, and it saved my life multiple times already since I started using it. So I have a small server, and it's using ZFS on one side and S3 on the other side. So I have all kind of mix, and it helped me multiple times already. Just not just for deleting documents, but also for design. Like an agent that I messed up and I didn't take a backup of it. Like, oh, I made those changes. Oh, I should not have done those changes. They were bad, and I have to roll back. And you can point point-in-time restore even with circular transaction log as long as the backups are still there. So you don't need archive transaction log necessarily for the last backup to be point-in-time restore.
Okay, I guess for design, and speaking about design, you're also backing up NTF files, right?
It's all the database files are backed up,
Yeah,
unless
it's just a different name.
Unless you specify excludes. You have flexible
Right.
excludes. I didn't went through that. If I would have looked into all the different parts of the backup, that would be a day workshop.
All right, 4 minutes left here. We're just not going to get through all of them, so we'll for sure do, as you say, an FAQ Q&A document.
Okay.
Get the easy ones.
Here's a good one, Graham.
Get the tough ones for me.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Can you back up, not back up, but can you restore to a different server to, let's say, test everything and make sure that it works? So is it possible to, back up a server A and then restore to server B?
Oh, that's tough because it's not designed to do that. It's always possible to do some configuration changes to do it, but it's not designed that way. Right? It's getting files for that server, and most of the backup flows have the server name in it to make it really stick to the server, and restoring to another server is a very difficult operation depending on your configuration. So if you have, for example, DAOs enabled, that's a showstopper because that makes it so complicated to restore on another server, because all the NLOs might not be there, right? Unless you're in a cluster and you're really lucky. And the other part is also when you have transaction log involved, that doesn't work. Plus, in case you have encrypted databases, that wouldn't work. So there are so many different aspects where a restore to another server is not feasible anymore in today's Domino environments, that putting energy into restore to another server by in a default configuration is really difficult, right? And also, as you saw in this workshop, not in detail, but you get ideas about it. It can be so flexible with all those different options that coming up with something that works for every different environment to restore to a different server would be really, really difficult to implement. And that's why you will never see something out of the box like this, because it's just not doable for all configurations. But it is all flexible, and it can be done, right? So it's not a definite no, but it is not easy.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Graham, did you want time
Let's
for one more?
Squeeze in one more. Yeah, there's a couple of different questions that are similar, and it's basically the configuration document and choosing which databases can actually be backed up. So in the one case, the question is just basically understanding how the exclude pattern works, and in the other one, it's, for example, saying I just want to back up the mail folder.
If you only want to back up the mail folder, and if this is like a permanent thing that you want this always, then we have to work with excludes. And the excludes are really regular expressions in node style, right? It's an add form. There's add formula behind it, and I have to check if we have good examples already. So I put some examples in presentations, and I think in help are some examples, but maybe we add some more into the Git repository to give you different scenarios, like exclude all NTFs and all those kind of cases. So I got the point. I will take this and see what we can do to document it in more detail, to give examples, right? Because only documenting how it works might not be helpful for everyone. So
yeah,
you can have multiple patterns. You can even, if you only once want to back up a certain database or multiple databases, you just say load, backup, and then mail. Then it will only take the mail directory for testing or for a quick backup. Or if you have one database that you really want to take a backup, then you say load and then this one backup. And then that would be a selected backup. The first backup that I showed you for the S3 backup, that was a selected backup just to see if the backup works, just for log NSF. Right, there are multiple ways of doing it. And what you could even do is you could override the excludes or change the excludes on command line. And that's documented.
well, cool.
It's not something that I just made up.
Fabulous. Okay, well, I think let's wrap it up here, and we'll get all of the questions answered and posted up onto our website.
I'm looking forward to the questions, and it was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and lots of positive feedback from our folks too. So thank you again. Howard, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Daniel. That was excellent presentation and a lot of cool stuff. And thanks to everyone for attending. And we'll put up the recording of this webinar and this presentation deck and the questions up on the OpenNTF website. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Take care.